Panthers are having a fire sale. Are we interested? Let's talk about that and all of your other questions on Twitter Tuesday. It is the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. It's Twitter Tuesday. That means I'm answering your questions. If you have questions for me, you can always send them to me at Luke Braun NFL or at Locked On Vikings on Twitter. You can also send them to the Google form, which is linked in the show notes most of the time. And you can also send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com or leave a YouTube comment. Before we get into the mailbag, pretty cool announcement. We are on Amazon Fire. We have on a Fire Stick and Roku. Locked On Minnesota and Locked On Atlanta are on those things. So if you have a Fire Stick or a Roku, you can download the Locked On Minnesota app. You can get Vikings, Wild, Twins, Wolves, all of those, Gophers, and the Minnesota Sports feed that's got like the football party and the Ron Johnson show and Superior Sports Talk on it. You can find all of that stuff at Amazon Fire and on Roku. On this Twitter Tuesday, I'm going to start with one from King Squeaks, who asks, who on the Panthers would you want the Vikings to realistically trade for the most? Thank you for setting me up with a lovely title. Great clickbait. But interesting question, right? So apparently all teams the phones are ringing. The report is every team has called. The Vikings sure are one of those. So who would they be calling about, right? It's free to call. So whether it's realistic or not, the call's not particularly meaningful. But let's chase the rabbit here. The Panthers roster does have some interesting young talent on it. Guys like Brian Burns or Derek Brown. There are certainly many other players that could be interesting for the Vikings to try to acquire. For one, they're a little tight on the cap, so probably not just acquiring somebody. It'd be like some player for player thing, which sort of defeats the purpose of the Panthers are selling off all their pieces who couldn't get a draft pick discount, right? Because they're trying to get rid of contracts probably if they're going to start selling off all their players. That said, there are maybe some interesting ideas. A guy like Tommy Tremble, right? Especially if Ben Ellefson is going to be on IR with his groin injury. Tommy Tremble could be an interesting, if I remember, he was a pretty do-it-all prospect coming out. I don't know how he's come along, but somebody like that, somebody like a cornerback, if you're interested in somebody like that would be who it is, but it's probably not in the cards for the Vikings to go buying right now. And there are some players, like, of course, you'd be like, well, let's figure out what we can do about Brian Burns. Like in a world where, they just figured out the cap. Like they'll figure it out somehow. They'll restructure a contract because if you're getting Brian Burns, it's worth it, right? They're not getting rid of Brian Burns, though. That guy's not going to be for sale. Like DJ Moore, not going to be for sale. Christian McCaffrey, we already know nobody has called, at least according to Tom Pelissero, as of like the immediate aftermath. By the way, if you missed it, the reason that they're doing all this, they fired Matt Rhule and a whole bunch of other staffers, and they're pretty clearly hitting the reset button here. So that means that some of those players, the McCaffreys of the Panthers, might be on the trade block. But I don't think the Vikings are buyers. Anti-Gravity asks, imagine you are Donatel. First, go stand in the corner because you know you put the fans through. Second, with Booth coming back and Evans maybe sideline, how would you best utilize him? Seems like Dantzler's doing okay, minus mental gaffes. P2's been burned a few times, and Sully seems to be the weak link, but not sure if the nickel role is simple enough for him to at least swap snaps. Okay, I don't think I would put Booth in the nickel. It just doesn't fit his skill set. Based on what I saw in training camp of Andrew Booth, not ready. Special teams. I don't think I trust him more than I trust Dantzler. I definitely don't trust him more than Dantzler or Booth. I don't think I trust him more than I trust Evans right now, who isn't very good, but at least he will be conservative about it. And Booth will jump things and kind of be crazy. And if you have to start Andrew Booth, you have to do a Trevon Diggs rookie year thing where he just jumps everything. and he just plays like fully YOLO, and he's going to get beat a whole bunch, and that's just like the world you live in. Um, yeah, I'm not feeling great about that, but that's part of his developmental arc, right? Where his not ready is just going to be worse than Evans is not ready, but his ready will be better enough. That's what made him like a better prospect. But you got to get the health right, and this stupid quad thing is really lingering, and that sucks. Josh asks, is Ed Donatell's play calling going to help or hinder the defense eventually getting their bleep together? I'm talking in terms of the way players are being used. So the way I understand it right now is that they are not getting what they are paying for. They are paying, the cost is Danielle Hunter doesn't rush on this snap, which, by the way, I probably overreacted. It was pointed out to me that they didn't do that as often as I thought. I just noticed it on a very high profile moment, which, like, bad moment, but that's probably not as prevalent as I thought. So I can relax on that. That said, when you do that, you're doing it hoping that the coverage works and hoping that a pressure gets home and stuff. And there's still a lot of thinking and a lot of stuff getting kind of worked out, kinks getting worked out. So I say once the execution is better, then it will work out, because what you get in exchange for Danielle Hunter backing off into coverage is hopefully forcing the offense into throwing hot, and throwing hot into a place that isn't there, because that's where Danielle Hunter is. That's like the ideal the ideal outcome in fire zone. You need a little luck to get there, but you get what I'm saying. So is the play calling going to help or hinder the defense eventually getting it together? Once they learn it, you'll be able to see what it's supposed to look like a little more. But right now, they're paying a bunch of schematic costs for people to screw up and not pay it off. So it's just bad. But it's, of course, not supposed to look that way. School All Day asks, assuming the defense doesn't get better, does Kwesi make a change at DC this offseason? I would be pretty shocked, because it would have to, you'd have to say, man, Ed Donatell just isn't teaching. Like, guys aren't learning things. And I still see them getting a little better every week. Real rough to give up what they gave up to the Bears. I think the Bears game was a step back, but it was like the first one. And let's see how they feel in December, right? Do they feel like they pulled it together a little bit? But I guess, yeah, if it doesn't get better, and if it gets worse or something like that, but it's like, then maybe we can talk about it. But it's not going to be about how good the defense was. It's going to be about how well did Ed Donatell manage the players. And there's going to be some internal factors to that we as fans just kind of can't know. So I would be really surprised if those factors were so extreme that they fired the guy after one season. I think patience is the answer here. Couple from Tony Trout first asks, how is good special teams play helping the defense keep the score down? The answer to that's field position, pretty much. And also, not just setting them up with short fields, giving them better long, but just one more chance to get a stop, right? If they're that much further back. And the second one is, how do you coach an offensive line to not draw holding penalties? So this is a big talking point with Oli Udoh, who was like, holy Udoh. But the way I understand it is, set yourself up more conservatively. A lot of holding penalties come from oversetting because you're reaching, because the guy you missed, right? Like you set up your pass protection wrong, and the guy's going around you missed, and now you're reaching. And then you just have to get people to not grab. You just have to kind of, a lot of teams will have referees in their training camps throwing holding penalties, pointing out when you grabbed, so you can get rid of that habit. There are certain footwork drills that you can do that help you learn how to shuffle, help you learn how to turn your hips. This is a big Christian Darrisaw thing. When a guy gets upfield on him, like, he'll set at a 45-degree angle, set rather conservatively. And if somebody fires really hard upfield at him, he's really good at getting his hips turned, getting upfield, and pushing you past the quarterback, which is way better. Younger tackles, lesser tackles will just grab, and it'll just be like a panic response. So it's a lot of it's just being comfortable, but mainly don't get yourself in that position in the first place, and learn to set up a little bit more conservatively so that you are able to handle things from better sides and getting your splits right and stuff like that. Like, a lot of those little sort of communication and polish things can lead to all of that stuff. I got a bunch more questions for you, but first, let me talk to you about your undies, specifically Tommy John underwear. It's comfy, breathable, lightweight fabric. It has 4 times the stretch of competing brands, and they come with a no wedgie guarantee, thanks to a non-rolling waistband and legs that never ride up. With over 17 million pairs sold, people love Tommy John underwear. Go to TommyJohn.com/lockedon right now for 20% off of your first order. Getting comfy undies, there's nothing like it. So go get 20% off at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. That's TommyJohn.com/lockedon. See site for details. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. If you want some more in-depth analysis, you can find my work at Zone Coverage. You can find my work at Patreon, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL for a more in-depth film analysis-y thing. If you want something a little more visual than what you can get on what is a podcast, go check it out. Patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. I got tape and I'm drawing on it like it's a telestrator. Maurice Morth, moving on with this mailbag, asks, has Dalvin Cook lost his burst in the secondary? Man, did you see this game? He was awesome in this game. I don't think he ever had a ton of like raw speed burst. That was never really his game. He would be able to set up safeties and get them to miss tackles and he'd just be past them. But it wasn't like Adrian Peterson where he was just way faster than you for all of a sudden. It was never really Dalvin Cook's game. So I don't think that anything has materially changed there. 1991 Ford Tempo Enthusiast asks, so far this season, has Bradbury played well enough to earn a second contract here? Okay, I got a version of this question like 8 times. What? Here's my deal on Bradbury, okay? And I know people are saying it because his PFF grade went up, and that's a lot of people are really just looking at that. I don't think Bradbury is different, really, from what he was before. If you had a problem with him before, you should have a problem with him now. I think he's getting a lot more help. I think that his ability in the run game is he's getting asked to do a little bit less in the run game. And so he's making fewer mistakes. I don't think his job is quite as hard. There's a lot more down blocking and a lot less reach blocking, or not a lot, but I think that it's a little different with like mid zone and stuff and duo. Specifically with duo, that means he's in double teams a lot more. I think his life's a little easier. And so he's being hidden a little better. And I think that's being reflected in a PFF grade. But here's what I'm going to say about I don't care. I'm not going to care about the PFF grade. Just because it agrees with my take now doesn't mean I'm suddenly going to start citing it. My read on Bradbury right now is that he is playing fine, hidden, replaceably. I don't think that's a second contract kind of guy. I think that's a let him walk and replace him with a Mason Cole type. And that was kind of always where I was at Bradbury. It's like, you're not going to bench him. You're not going to cut him. If you're going to trade him, you're not going to do it for a conditional 7th, but he's not getting an extension. He's not getting his 5th-year option. 5th-year option for centers is almost never worth it anyways. I don't see him having a 10-year future in Minnesota or anything like that. If there is material improvement in his play, I think it's just because he's not being leaned on as much. And I don't think that he just got better. I think he's being asked to do less. Dr. Bops asks, Will Raggett's tweeted about per quarter stats and we're winning in every quarter but the third, which we're losing 33-6. Any idea why and how we may be able to... Oh, sorry. Okay, one more thing with Bradbury. The reason that he struggled a lot, and this is kind of what I said to Cape for him, was because he was asked to do a lot more difficult things. And it led to more losses, and he just wasn't as good at that stuff in a way that I guess PFF grades do adjust for a little bit, but I think it was affecting him more, and he was failing more than he should at those difficult things. But those difficult things allowed a lot of other people to have easier jobs. That is no longer true. He's not failing as much, but I always kind of cape for him because he's got the hardest job on the line. He's one-on-oneing on nose tackles, 30 pounds heavier than him. He's reach blocking across to 2 eyes all the time. He was doing crazy stuff. And they were asking the world of him, and now they're not. That doesn't make him a better player. It makes it a better fit. But far less irreplaceable than somebody who can reach 2 eyes, right? You find that, you keep it. But Bradbury's not that guy. Okay, sorry. We were losing 33-6 in the third quarter. Any idea why and how we may be able to help that? That's probably a noise thing. Quarter splits don't do much for me. What's the material difference between 2 minutes left in quarter 3 and 14 minutes left in quarter 4? That's where the difference is going to be, right? sure, second and fourth quarter have 2-minute drills, and those tend to compress and get more scoring. And first quarter, you're coming out of the game. Those first two drives can be a lot different than the rest of the game. Like, there's some stuff, but like, I don't think that it's like, what are your third quarter plays? Well, you go into practice, we got to improve in third quarters, so we're going to do X. I don't think there's a great answer to that. And I think it's just because it's like saying, can you be better on Tuesdays than on Wednesdays? It's like, well, what's different? Probably a noise thing, but we'll see. I mean, I don't know. Let's see if that hangs in. Ask me again 5 games from now, and if it's still a thing, then maybe I'll think about it harder. Thai Soup asks, does Reagor scoring a TD mean we have to evaluate his worth to the team as a football player and no longer as just an absolute hot dish? No, he's a sex object first and a football player second, always. The TD was fine. We got a jet sweep, did a little shifty, made a move, but it seems like that's all he's got right now is gadget stuff. And that can only be so useful. He's misread a couple leverages and stuff. So he's very clearly still not performing well enough to like be a future part of the Vikings or anything like that. And I almost never want him on the field over like Thielen or Osborne, and not over Irv Smith or over CJ Ham or like another skill player he'd be replacing. So I don't think that TD really, like, because it came on a jet sweep, which is like all he's got, like, yeah, that doesn't really change my opinion of him. Daniel Hagan asks, what do you think it's like to watch a Vikings game with Mike Zimmer? Does he root for the team or secretly hope that they bust every coverage? Does he smugly smirk when a pass play doesn't work out and mutter should have ran the ball? I think it would be very cool because I think he could probably tell you a lot more about what's going on defense. Like, really, like, he could do it. And again, this isn't media press conference Zimmer. If you're sitting down with him and he's not going to get in trouble, and he doesn't have to worry about giving away secrets or whatever, and he can actually talk to you, oh, that'd be really cool. I'd be into that, honestly. Dude just loves ball. Like, loves football. He doesn't love people. He loves football. Like, talk to him about football. Yeah, I bet you get some pretty cool stuff. Master of Moss says, what actually goes into installing a tempo offense? Why can't you install that for the whole game? Are players memorizing a sequence of plays with multiple possibilities at the line? So they're memorizing like a menu, kind of. Every team does it different, but the way I understand it is you've got like a menu of no huddle plays. And I think the way the Vikings have done it, because they've had a drive or two like this every game, where they come out and they say, okay, here's our tempo drive. A lot of teams will do it by colors. So you've got red, you've got blue, you've got your black, green, yellow, like here's your plays, and you've got to memorize 7 or 8 of them. So how long can that list be? And you trust every player to have it memorized perfectly so that when Kirk Cousins goes, Orion, everybody does the right thing. That's the limit, right? And that menu, how long can that menu of plays be? That's how I understand it being installed. Again, every team does it different. If you're a high school coach, you might do it differently than me, and I'm interested to hear how everybody does it. But you're always going to run into that same constraint where everything has to be linked to something some shorthand that is hidden enough to not tip off the defense because they can hear it too, but intuitive enough that your players can memorize it. And you can only have so many of those words before people start messing them up. You can't memorize 100 of those, or you can't trust 11 players to all memorize 100 of those the same, because one person makes a mistake and it's a catastrophe. I've got a few more questions here on this Twitter Tuesday mailbag, so we will get into them. But first, let me talk to you about a good old Gramble. I got a great Grambling story, courtesy of Bet Online. Went to betonline.net. Entered a couple of live bets in the middle of the Chiefs-Raiders game. They went down 17-0. They came back, won the game. And at that moment, the Chiefs were plus 210. So I got Chiefs plus 210 against the Raiders. Now, I didn't catch what their opening line was, but I'm going to guess that they were favored in that game. And I got them as 2-1 underdogs. Made a little bit of moolah on that. And if you want to get that kind of stuff, you can, of course, bet on player props, spreads, lines, all the normal stuff, and other sports as well. Baseball playoffs are underway. Basketball season's coming around. You can do that at betonline.net, where the game starts. A few more questions here on this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. Next one comes from Joshua Brook, who says, what was the best British/English food you had when you visited England? We had some really great stuff. We did high tea, which is a very hoity-toity experience. That was very fun. I had a lot of sausage rolls, and they were all good, whether they were street food looking stuff or something from like a restaurant that seemed a little nicer. I got a sausage roll at like a deli counter at Stonehenge that like looked like it's everything there is going to be overpriced and bad, but it was like really tasty. I even had a vegan one at a train station that was nice. Like sausage rolls, I'm going to go with. Ryan Wright season asks, will Joseph get his groove back, or is he forever cursed with a kicking curse? He's always going to be cursed because somebody on Twitter made a fan cam. Matthias, you know what you did. He's dead now. It's over. Greg Joseph is done. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't read too much into missing 50-yarders. Those are 50-50 propositions. He's had 4 of them, and he's missed 3 of them. Flip a coin 4 times, do that over and over, and see how many times you go 1 for 4, right? It happens. So, and they've expressed the utmost faith in him and stuff. Unless he starts missing extra points and missing other stuff, then we have a cause for concern. But right now, it's just like slightly below expectation and not like so much concern that we have to think about replacing him. It's like, yeah, you got to be a little better than that. But we're a lot closer than we'll bring in someone else and he'll do it. Ben Meyer asks, when a field goal is blocked, and one of those 50-yarders was blocked, which wasn't his fault. Is it usually the fault of the kicker for kicking it at a low trajectory, or of the special teams blocking unit for letting defenders get too much push? So the one this week, it's always going to be case by case is really the answer to this, because sometimes it can be because you kicked it too low. But if it's a long field goal, you have to kick it low. You can't get air and distance under it unless you're Justin Tucker, right? So you have to kick it low to get that extra distance on it, and then it'll be easier to block. But in this particular one, there was penetration. Somebody got through the line. So somebody screwed up the block. I didn't catch who, but it was penetration, and somebody let in and got that block. That could have been a perfect kick, and it would have still been blocked. It could have been an awful kick, still would have been blocked. Pancake Bunny asks, where does Kirk Cousins rank in tight window attempts this year / for his career? I don't have exact numbers in front of me, but off the dome, I believe he was pretty famously a very tight window thrower. He was a chance taker in that way. There's a lot of talk about like Kirk Cousins and conservatism and stuff. And depending on what you define as conservative, you'll get different readings. Does he throw deep? Yes. Does he test tight windows? To a fault sometimes. He would think could zip one in there, get a little overconfident. But does he, pass up good opportunities for something safer? Yeah, sometimes. But how does that manifest itself statistically? Isn't always consistent, and so it doesn't always show up in like big, giant longitudinal studies. It's a whole thing. But I believe he was pretty famous for testing tight windows a lot, but you don't always have to test a tight window. And this year, I don't think he's tested tight windows a lot because there's been a lot of really open dudes. That's not a complaint. That rules. We love that. We take that all day. There's nothing wrong with that. And like on rollouts and bootlegs and stuff, you aren't testing tight windows. Not like you're a drop back West Coast spread offense guy where you're trying to zip things in between zone defenders breaking on the ball all the time. So some of that is just the style of quarterback. Doesn't necessitate tight windows. So I don't know statistically, but the like overall statistical tight window stuff will introduce a lot of noise that's going to get into the way of the actual question you're trying to answer, which is, does Kirk Cousins test tight windows? Can he make accurate throws in contested spots? The answer is yes. The answer is he's absolutely willing to do that. Sometimes too willing. Sometimes he passes one up and you wish he took it. But I prefer to take that on a play-by-play basis rather than trying to add it all, tally it all up. And in doing so, any fair way of doing so is just going to be influenced by stuff you're trying to not care about. Austrian Vikings fan says, I wonder how you are, as a European fan, I wonder how you thought the atmosphere was like at Tottenham Stadium. How different is an NFL game day or stadium visit in Europe compared to the US? So the actual stadium itself felt like the same. They had this, bunch of scoreboards around. They actually used the assets that the teams use. I'm sure. I haven't been to a Saints game at the Superdome, but they had the intro that they play at US Bank Stadium for the Vikings. And then they played when the Saints go marching in every time the Saints scored a touchdown, which I'm pretty sure they do at the Superdome, and other Superdome assets. You could hear it during the Packers game. They had the little dum 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 for the Go Pack Go. They use like the home team's stadium assets. It's exactly the same. The crowd is what was different to me. It was very much a soccer crowd. They were into it. They were chanting. They were way more organized, and it was very cool. There is definitely a vibe of just, we're here to enjoy the sport that You don't see a lot at football games, mostly because the game is a lot more biased toward one team. Like, it was a neutral crowd. The only other neutral crowd you get at the Super Bowl is at the Super Bowl, and the Super Bowl or Chargers games. Uh, I'm sorry, but at the Super Bowl, it's not a very jazzed crowd. Like, it's more corporate. There's a lot of celebrities that are just there to be there's like a lot of people at the Super Bowl. It's like a very weird smattering of people. They're not football diehards so much. These are sports diehards that are chanting and doing crazy stuff. And there's that energy, but it's also neutral. They're cheering for things on both sides. And there's a lot of Vikings fans and a lot of Saints fans. So that was part of it, but you could really feel the just like raw football passion. It was really cool. Zeeb asks, Kirk touched Christian Darrisaw's chain and morphed into kirked up white boy goated with the sauce. I did not write that. Zeeb wrote that. What's the most powerful effect a sweet chain has ever had on you? I cannot say I have ever interacted with a sweet chain, and therefore cannot say that it has ever had an effect on me. I'm going to have to go with a not applicable on this one. Zachary Hayes says, the draft is like 6 months away. So what is the most dire need on the team? Corner still? LB? Probably corner. Patrick Peterson's probably going to retire after this year. I think he's just about done. And then you've got Andrew Booth. I don't know if you trust him. Cameron Dantzler probably are going to stick with him as a starter. Caleb Evans is depth. Shannon Sullivan's only on a 1-year deal, so either you bring him back or you don't, but maybe a nickel corner somewhere in the draft. You probably aren't doing a first-round pick on him because it's not like Zimmer's scheme needed a nickel, more from a nickel. So spending a first on that made a little more sense to me. Probably not now. Linebacker could be a decent idea. Jordan Hicks is only on a 2-year deal. Eric Kendricks isn't getting any younger. Probably set at safety. You're going to go with Scene and Bynum. And, you're not going to give up on Scene and go draft him safety next year, I guess is a better way to put that. Yeah, that's probably it. Can never have too many wideouts. Can never have too many corners. That's like always a good idea, even if your room is stacked. Could go for a quarterback if you wanted to go there, but that's a different conversation. Yeah. So tomorrow, hopefully I'll be able to get to tape and talk to you a little bit more about some of the cool stuff that I saw in this game. The tempo thing I talked about yesterday. There's an interesting pattern that I noticed. I wrote an article about it, about Kirk Cousins and high-low concepts that goes back to the Saints game and goes through a lot of the things Cousins said after the game, sort of explaining his critiques of himself and looking at the plays. That's at Zone Coverage. I'll probably talk about that tomorrow as well. So I will we'll get into all of that. I'll see y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.